So welcome to our webinar. I'll say a little bit about Engaging Dementia first. Engaging Dementia is a training and resource organisation. We provide training resources and supports to people with dementia and those who care for them. Primarily people who work in care centres, staff in care centres, day centres, residential care centres, but also we're very involved in community activities, in particular dementia cafes. With funding from the National Dementia Office, we're currently establishing an Irish Dementia Cafe network. Our training is primarily around communication and therapeutic activities, the use of music, sensory interventions, the creative arts and the outdoors. The Summits programme is our key programme, and that's a therapeutic activity for people with moderate to late dementia. So I'd like to introduce you now to our speaker, Donal Scanlan. Donal has been working and studying as a professional in the area of mental health and wellbeing for the past 20 years. He leads the team at Mental Health First Aid Ireland, and they bring mental health training to communities and workplaces all over Ireland. Donal has spoken about mental health in digital, print, broadcast media, and he's guest lectured in several places, including the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland and University College Dublin. Today, Donal is talking in his professional capacity and also drawing on his personal experience. So I'll hand over to you, Donal.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm going to just put up a presentation here for everybody to see.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for I suppose, Engaging Dementia for inviting me to come and speak to you a little bit about mental health first aid, and looking forward to any questions that people might have as well at the end of the session. So as I was introduced, my name is Donal Scanlan. I'm the manager of Mental Health First Aid. I have, I suppose, worked in the area of mental health now, like was said there, for about 20 years. I'm a mental health professional in my background. And let me just get this to work, I apologize. Yeah, and I'm a mental health professional in my background. I'm a nurse actually in my background, working in the area of mental health and well-being, primarily in a training role for the last kind of 5 to 6 years, focusing on health promotion, well-being, and now most recently Mental Health First Aid Ireland. I'm going to tell you a lot more about Mental Health First Aid and hopefully a little bit more about myself as well. I come from here, just in case anybody recognises it. This is Glenroe. That's my hometown, and I like to tell people about that, I suppose, because I grew up in a a small rural village in North Wicklow, South County Dublin kind of commuter belt, and but a village nonetheless. And when I was growing up, if you wanted to know where your friends were at, you stuck your head out the door and you looked at where the bikes were, and that's really where you got a sense of where your friends were at. There wasn't any tweeting about it, there wasn't any checking in on Facebook, and it certainly wasn't, you weren't being tracked everywhere you went. But equally, it was a small community where when there was problems, people gathered together. And I certainly remember growing up plenty of occasions where that we would have had issues in the family and different health issues and scares, and we would have been able to call on our neighbours. And while somebody might need to be in hospital for a period of time, there would have been food in the fridge. I can remember my dad working still because there was support with childcare, family gathered around, friends gathered around, neighbours were always there, the door was always open. When mental health visited our houses though, the door wasn't always so open. I think people didn't talk about it quite so much. There wasn't the same availability. And while I think we're talking more about mental health these days, and this is a good example of that, this kind of talk, I think we can still do a little bit better. And that's my challenge. I get to go out into communities, I get to go to workplaces, I get to speak about mental health, trying to engage people in this conversation. For me, when I say the phrase mental health, I like to ask my audience, what comes to mind? What words pop into our head when we think about mental health? I suppose primarily people tend to respond with, well, when I say mental health, people think, okay, depression, anxiety, maybe psychosis, to a lesser extent, substance abuse for some people. And we think about illness very often though. And now, depending on your perspective, you might come from it from a well-being perspective or a more holistic approach, but very often it's medication, it's hospitalization, it's the old stereotypical attitudes towards mental health, and some of the phrases that you might see here on the screen in front of you. Very often our understanding of mental health is shaped by the media, shaped by our exposure to movies, to music, to the print media, and nowadays to the internet. So again, our language and our understanding of mental health is shaped from these places as well. So what is mental health? Well, mental health is about how you think about yourself and how you feel about yourself. We're all thinking and feeling human beings. I hope you are today. And when your thoughts and feelings get in the way of you being able to reach your potential in life, this is when we get into mental health problems. But your potential on an everyday basis and how your thoughts and feelings interact with that, well, that's your mental health. The way I like to say to people is we all have mental health, the same way we all have physical health. Mental health problems or mental illness, well, this is when it becomes problematic. And a diagnosable illness is when those thoughts and feelings are negative or difficult to the point that they disrupt a person's ability to engage in their daily activities, make good choices in relation to what they eat, where they go, the people they hang around with. Also disrupts their ability to engage in their work, engage in satisfying relationships. You know, when I say relationships, I don't mean romantic relationships. I mean our relationships with others, our ability to communicate with others, or even willingness or even want to be amongst other people is often dictated by how we are thinking and feeling. So when it becomes problematic for a period of time, this is when we get into the area of mental illness. Statistically, in Ireland, 1 in 5 of the population will experience a diagnosable mental illness in any given year. That's a lot of people. You know, that's half the population in Ireland in their lifetime will experience a diagnosable mental illness. Most commonly, anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. However, I would just say to you that 1 in 5 statistic, well, that is a number which I think a little bit is wrong. Just from my own personal experience, I would say to you that in my lifetime, so let's say I'm in my 40s, we won't be specific where, and in my 40s, I have had, during my lifetime, I've had 2 episodes of mental health difficulty, once in my teens and once again in my mid-30s. And what I would say to you is that on neither occasion did I require a hospitalization, did I get a diagnosis, did I even go on medication? But it didn't mean that I wasn't having some trouble with my mental health at that time, some difficulty, which if I had seen a doctor or I had seen a mental health professional, there's a very good chance I would have been diagnosed. That's a long-winded way of saying to you, I don't think it's 1 in 5, I think it's 5 in 5. Certainly in a lifetime, we will all potentially experience difficulty and we will all benefit from help or support from those around us. Another reason why I think we need things like mental health first aid, which I'm going to talk to you about, is because of the level of stigma that we have in this country. And rather than just hearing it from my words, I want you to hear it from somebody else. So here we go, a little video for you to watch as well.
You don't do yourself any favours.
You're making a big deal out of nothing.
Oh, grow up. Sure, we all have bad days.
Just get over it.
Stop being so paranoid.
Look, we all have our own problems. Things aren't that bad.
Stop talking, you sound like a dope.
It's all in your head.
You should be depressed
Just have a drink, you'd be
You
grand.
make a big deal out of it.
Just take a day off together.
Just get a few pints in you. You'll be grand then.
Is it any wonder that 1 in 2 Irish people would rather suffer in silence? You don't need to be an expert to start talking about mental health or have all the answers. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is to let someone know that you're there for them. Ask them how they're doing and simply listen.
Certainly in Ireland, Sea Change, who are the National Partnership for Stigma Reduction, are responsible for challenging the stigma around mental health in Ireland. So that's a partnership organisation of lots of different companies, voluntary and charity sector groups, public sector groups, all working together to challenge the stigma around mental health. About 46% of under 35-year-olds will conceal a mental health difficulty in this country. That's a lot of people not talking. 78% of males would be unlikely to seek professional help if they had a mental health problem. Again, that's a lot of people not seeking help. That's the biggest outcome from stigma is silence, people not reaching out for help. And I suspect that if I was to ask you to consider a friend or a family member who was having a difficulty, and I was to ask you, what would you do for them? What would you recommend? You would recommend that they talk to somebody about it because it's good to talk, isn't it? Well, we know that it's good to talk. here's my question to you. Who educates the listeners? Because we don't tend to go around with a huge amount of confidence about how to have that conversation. So while we get encouragement to talk about it, we're not really sure if we're going to do that or how we do that. The impact of mental illness around the world, just to give you a sense of that, mental health problems are the leading cause of disease burden in developed countries. And I know depression is actually being predicted to be the leading cause of disease burden by 2030. Now, when I was growing up, 2030 was like that movie Back to the Future. It seemed decades away. Well, it is only a decade away now. It's only around the corner. And yet depression and other mental health problems are now having a significant impact on our livelihood, on our ability to engage in our lives, to lead happy, satisfying lives. And half of all mental health conditions will start by the age of 14. Now, to me, when I want to talk to you a little bit about early intervention, which I'll mention in a moment, then early intervention needs to start when we were young. In our schools, yes, most certainly, but also in our homes, conversations around our dinner table, around our sitting room, with our friends, with our neighbors, with our kids, having better conversations about mental health when people are young to help them progress into their adulthood, being more ready and willing to and able to talk about mental health. Early intervention helps things from becoming more serious. And our aim is to teach people how to talk about mental health so that we can offer support earlier. The longer you leave it, the worse the outcome. The easier recovery is when you engage in it earlier. And we know for a fact that support from family, friends, and work colleagues can make all the difference during this time. And for us, this is why mental health first aid is so important. You see, I suppose I'll ask you this question. Have you ever worried about somebody else's mental health and thought, oh, will I say something? I don't know. What if they tell me to get lost? What if they tell me it's none of my business? Or what if they tell me what's wrong and I don't know what to say? I don't know what to do. Am I going to be responsible for them? Sure, I leave it. They'll be grand. And then we do leave it. And maybe they are okay, but we still wish we'd said something because, we're good people. Or maybe they're struggling and now they're in crisis and we really wish we'd said something. Well, what if we could have that conversation? What if we could have more confidence, more knowledge to be able to know that what we were saying was the evidence-based response to when somebody's having a difficulty with their mental health. And this, for me, is where mental health first aid comes in. Now, I've been working in the area of mental health, like I said, for about 20 years, and never until this time have I come across any piece of training that helped people in a broad spectrum approach to mental health. Mental health first aid is the help offered to somebody who's experiencing a mental health difficulty, maybe a worsening of an existing mental health problem, or somebody who's in crisis with their mental health. And that help is offered or is given until appropriate treatment has been received or until the crisis resolves. So it very much follows the line of physical first aid. How do I recognize when someone's having a problem? How can I hold them in that space safely and look after myself in the process? And how can I help them and signpost them towards the help that has been shown to be effective, proven to be effective? And again, rather than just hearing it from my words, I thought you might like to hear from somebody else.
I'm Danny. I've lived with depression and anxiety for about 12 years. And today I'm going to be opening up about those mental health challenges with some complete strangers in the hopes that we can start normalizing conversations about mental health. Hi, I'm Danny. Nice to meet you.
I'm Colleen. It's nice to meet you too.
Cecilio, nice to meet you.
How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
I'm doing really good. Yeah.
Doing good. Yourself?
I'm actually not doing so well today.
Okay, that's honest.
Oh, it's all right.
Okay. So.
Okay.
Okay, what's going on?
Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Do you feel comfortable talking about it, or?
Yeah, I can talk about it. So I've been living with depression for a long time, and this week has been particularly hard for me. So a lot of people simply just don't know what to say and what to do when somebody opens up to them about a mental health or addiction challenge. And that's really where mental health first aid can be valuable. It teaches people a concrete action plan for starting a conversation and getting somebody the support that they need, whether that's treatment or just a non-judgmental listening ear. So was it a little unexpected when I responded that I wasn't doing well, us being complete strangers until this moment?
I'll be honest, it caught me off guard. You just expect the automatic response of, how are you doing? I'm good.
When you first meet someone, here there's like a huge distance.
I always feel like, how can I help someone else? So, and I know it's hard because you just want to be like, oh, sorry, okay, let me run,
And I don't think people do it because they're inconsiderate. I think it's because they honestly just don't know what to say.
Have you talked to anyone about this?
Sometimes I just don't want to burden. Yeah.
I know it feels like that, but most of the time people want to help.
Yeah.
Like everyone kind of wants to be useful to other people, so they want to help you. So don't feel like you're burdening them.
That was really nice.
That's so sweet. I like totally wanted to give you a hug, and then I was like, that might be weird, but okay.
No, that was like exactly like what you should have said.
Myself, I was thinking like, okay, this person is in need of help. Try your best. Listen to them. Sometimes that's the best thing you can do is just listen.
If you had cancer, you wouldn't just try to you wouldn't will yourself to get better with that. And so I hope that people just start talking about it more.
Wouldn't it be refreshing if we could take off the mask?
Yes, absolutely. Be real people.
So how did you learn how to respond that way?
My father committed suicide when I was young, and it was like a really pivotal change. And I think I spent most of my life trying to avoid that and avoid talking about that and like the shame and the guilt. So I really made this decision to like learn how to interact with people and be empathetic and show people that someone does care about them even if I don't know you. I think people should just ask more questions, because it's like once you get to know the person and understand that it could literally be any of us, like any of us could have this at any point in our lives, how could you make a judgment on it?
Can I give you a hug?
Well, absolutely. I love hugs.
Thank you.
That's from our colleagues in the USA, and mental health first aid is actually present in nearly 31 countries around the world now, with over 3 million people trained in mental health first aid. And so why is it important? And that's what we were here to talk about today. Well, mental health problems are common. As we've said, even if it is just a 1 in 5, by the way, that's a lot of people. All right, that's a lot of people. Think about it. That's Croke Park filled 14 times over in 1 year. That makes it a lot of people, even if it is just that. And I actually do believe that it's a lot more than that. And that the reality is that we will all at some point in our life experience mental health difficulty, even if it isn't a diagnosis, or even if it isn't a medicated illness or an illness that requires us to be hospitalized, we will have a mental health difficulty. And like the lady in the video said there, maybe we could just ask questions a little bit more, because everybody has a story. And maybe if we could understand and hear that story, we could relate to them even just a little bit so that they can feel heard in that moment. Not necessarily having to fix it, not necessarily having to make it better, but people with mental health difficulties just aren't well informed. Many people aren't well informed about the difficulties they're having, or they're not well informed about other people's mental health problems. We're not talking enough about our own mental health. Yeah, we're talking more about mental health these days, but we're talking about other people's mental health rather than our own. A lot of people don't seek help, either because they don't know where that help can be accessed, or because they believe, as I think sometimes we've stigmatized mental health services to the point now that people think that, sure, what's the point? I'll only end up on a waiting list, or I'll only just end up on medication. There's no holistic approach to my mental health. Well, actually, that's not true, but maybe we need a bit of help navigating the system. There's a high level of stigma and discrimination, and we know one of the biggest ways and one of the best ways to challenge that stigma is through education. Mental health first aid is actually a funding partner of Sea Change, and that's one of the reasons why we engage in the stigma reduction work within Ireland as well. Many people don't even realize that they need help or that effective help is available. That video shows a really great way of having a conversation when somebody tells you they're having a problem, but also mental health first aid is useful for those people who don't even realize they're having a problem. How do we have that conversation? How do I bring it to someone's attention that they might be having difficulty in an area of their health that they hadn't considered, their mental health. Professional help isn't always immediately available, and therefore, again, a helper's actions can make a difference. First aid can make a difference. We know this to be true with our physical health. We just need to kind of see the common sense approach that mental health first aid can provide. And it has resulted in better knowledge, better help-giving behaviors, and better attitudes towards mental health. It has been shown to be as effective at challenging stigma as a national mental health awareness campaign, and that people are more likely to offer help having done the training than if they hadn't done the training. What we teach on the course is for people to be able to recognize when people are having difficulty with their mental health. What does it look like? What are the triggers and what are the signs? And we talk a little bit about that. So some of the triggers being things like people's personal life changes, a physical health problem, a relationship breakdown, having children, moving home, bereavements, all kinds of issues, and certain changes in work potentially, redundancy or additional pressures in work. We then talk about what are the signs to spot. What are we looking for? Ultimately, we're looking for the changes. We often know them a little bit. We also often know them in our gut. But mental health first aid allows us to examine what are the specific changes that might exist when people are experiencing various mental health difficulties. And then what do we do about it? So what are they noticing in the physical sense? What are they noticing from an emotional perspective? What are they noticing from a behavioral perspective? People's sleep patterns, people's irritability, maybe becoming more aggressive, increased conflicts, sudden weight gain or sudden weight loss, frequent headaches or stomach aches, very physical experiences, but related to their mental health. At work, what does it look like? Increased errors, difficulty, with sickness absence, being fixated on grievance procedures, and ultimately we're helping workplaces look into the mental health of their employees and how best to support. For us, it is absolutely not about diagnosis. We're not teaching people to be experts about mental health or to diagnose. Instead, we want people to be able to go out and have a better conversation and try to relate to the experience that the person is having. Not the actual illness, not diagnosing it, not telling them how to fix it or make it all better, but just to sit and listen, to spend some time with a person, and for that interaction to have made a difference. And if there's a crisis, well then yes, what to do with that and how to address it and how to get the help that the person might need. The standard mental health first aid course is about 12 hours long. Right? It covers the signs and symptoms, like I said, of mental health difficulties and what sort of help has been shown to be effective. We offer people a framework of communication to help guide them through the process of that conversation. Not give them a script, but just help guide them, give them support. We look at the areas such as depression, anxiety, psychosis, and substance abuse, and the various crises associated with that, such as suicidal thoughts and behaviors, panic attacks, severe psychotic states, and maybe aggressive behaviors. And all the while doing so in an evidence-based way, showing people what is the evidence-based response internationally. Now, admittedly, it's first world English-speaking countries that the evidence has been retrieved from, but it is still an international response to a mental health problem rather than just a good idea. This is where mental health first aid sits for us, in the area of early intervention mostly. And you'll see that it skirts a little bit into treatment, but it's not a treatment option. It's just about helping people engage in treatment a little bit earlier, with the hope that the earlier you get that help, the better the outcome. Mental health first aid talks to people about how to have that conversation, how to start having that conversation, how to look after yourself during that process as well. What are useful questions to ask? And again, not a script, but just some prompts, some things, some ways of asking questions to help the person explore what might be going on for them, to give them an opportunity to speak about what it is that they're experiencing, and to give you the opportunity to have the acceptance and the willingness to just sit and listen, and for that listening not to be awkward, those silences not to be awkward, but instead to give you permission to maybe, think about your body language, think about what you might say or how you might say something rather than just what you might say, with very much focus on the concept of empathy, trying to understand how somebody might be feeling and to be able to put yourself in that place, of the place of that person, and to be able to communicate to that person that you got it. This is not enough just to sit there and think, yeah, I'm being empathetic, but actually you've got to find a way to communicate to that person that you heard them, that you see them, that you understand what they're going through is difficult, and that you're there to listen to them, and maybe give them a sense of what's a sense of hope, a sense of what's to come, what happens next, how to keep that conversation going, how to give that person reassurance that this isn't uncommon, that this happens to a lot of people, and that there's really good, effective help available for them. And then, yes, what is the kind of supports that are in place for them afterwards? What sort of signposting can we do about the appropriate professional help and other supports, family, friends, self-help work, support groups, all kinds of things. Just in case what I've been talking about has been any way difficult or stimulating, we always like to tell people about the Samaritans phone number 116-123, or you can email them at jo@samaritans.ie. And if you want to, you can even ring them or email them just for advice yourself about somebody else. If it's not you, you can actually ring them and say, look, I need some help with this person. This is something that's going on for them. Can you give me some advice on where to signpost them towards that help? We're not in the business of fixing people. We're not looking for you to fix people either with mental health first aid. We want to help the person help themselves. I mentioned that it's in about 31 countries around the world, and that there's about over 3 million people trained. In Ireland alone, we have about 7,700 people that have been trained in mental health first aid over the last 5 years. Some of the findings from the research that's been done around mental health first aid has been shown to improve mental health literacy, the language, the vernacular, the understanding around the topic of mental health. Has improved the participants' confidence and willingness to engage when somebody might be experiencing a difficulty. It has increased helping behaviours, reduced stigma, and where measured, and it isn't measured very often, but where measured, it has actually even improved the participants' own mental health. So it has the ability to help us reflect and mind our own mental health as well. It's very much grounded in the national policy around mental health in Ireland, such as Healthy Ireland Initiative, Connecting for Life, which is the current suicide prevention strategy in Ireland, and lots of other national strategies as well. In Ireland, here's some of the organisations and companies that we've worked with to date already. We've only been in existence, like I said, for about 5 years. We're very much a fledgling organisation, but every day that goes by, the people that we come in contact with grows and grows. There's some of the organizations, some of the pictures of some of the groups that have been through our training, and then even recently we brought it to a remote setting. So we've been able to either social distancing, as we've been doing some face-to-face training with the Defence Forces prior to deployment, and they've been able to do it through social distancing, or we've even gone online and delivered our course virtually, which we're going to continue to do. So even with COVID-19, we still want to be able to reach the people that need the support and education around mental health and mental health first aid. And that's my lot. Stick a fork in me. I am done. Thank you very much. And I hope I can answer some of your questions now.
Thank you so much, Donal, for that very interesting and informative presentation. So thank you. To let people, just to repeat there how to submit a question, if you go into Q&A and click on that, you can submit a question. So Donal, I suppose I'll get it started here. I took a look at that poll. Thank you everybody for filling it in. About 85% of people who are attending today are in a caring role. So 3/4 are health and social care professionals, and then the others are family carers. In the context of caring, would you have any thoughts on mental health first aid? So most people here would be caring for somebody with dementia.
Sure, yeah. And just to give you a bit of a personal background on that, by the way. So, I mean, not only from a professional perspective have I worked in dementia care settings before, but I've also even nursed relatives of my own and very close relatives of my own, and with dementia. And I suppose one thing I remember about that was not only the challenge of, of dealing with that person and managing that person and their physical and mental health, but actually the challenge of managing my own mental health and that of my family around us. I think the learning skills to be able to recognize when either we're having difficulty ourselves or when those around us are having difficulty. Admittedly, I know mental health first aid is not specific to dementia by any stretch, but the thing about when I have conversations about mental health, it isn't about what causes the problem. It's about the outcome, what it's like for that person, that real experience for them. If they're scared, if they're terrified potentially, if they're worried, anxious, frustrated, confused, whatever the feeling they're having, the ability to be able to engage with that person, be that somebody with dementia or be that somebody in our family or our social network or, you know, somebody who's struggling with their mental health, to have a little bit more confidence and a little bit more knowledge seems to make a huge difference to people's lives. It gives them a sense that they have a sense of empowerment, that they are not alone as well, to realize that this conversation is actually a universal one, that it crosses all kinds of social boundaries, that whether it's somebody, you know, who's in a caring role, or whether it's, you know, a high court justice or a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer or somebody who sweeps the streets, it doesn't matter. Mental health is a real equal opportunity employer, you know, it affects all of us. And I suppose one of the things about when you're in a caring role, and I certainly haven't been in that in a long time, but my thoughts are with people who are, because it can feel very lonely and it can feel very isolating. And I suppose, or isolated, I should say, and to not feel so alone when it comes to the mental health side of things, you know, that would be, I think, a huge component of our well-being. It's not the full picture by any stretch, but we have an awful lot of people talking to us about how, yes, we should sleep more, and how should we go for those walks and go to the gym and eat right. But maybe not so many people having the conversation about mental health. It's kind of one of these conversations that people realize, oh yeah, sure, I know I should do that, but I'll deal with it when it happens, instead of realizing that actually I can take some responsibility for it right now, and I can do things in my own daily, you know, life that will help me look after my mental health. So we find that our participants not only learn skills about how to help others, and that is at the end of the day the focus of mental health first aid, but they come away with an awareness and an acceptance that they too have to look after their own self-care and their own well-being in relation to their mental health.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question here from someone who's asking, are there any tips for supporting mental health for the person that you're caring for? Just following on from your comments there.
Yeah, I mean, again, without getting into what causes problems for people. So for some people, if you're caring for somebody with dementia, you know, there's this sense of, well, it doesn't matter what I do, I'm not going to make it any better because this is just it's only going in one direction type thing. We'll often think to ourselves. But actually, the thing to remember is that what we're looking to do is to respond to that person in that moment. And if what they're feeling in that moment is still very real, it doesn't matter whether it's because of something, you know, greater, or degenerative illness. It is actually that person in that moment, and having I suppose a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more skills and a little bit more confidence, most importantly, to be able to respond to that person in an empathic way, in an empathetic way, I should say, and in a way that gives reassurance and shows that we're really hearing them. I think it can make all the difference, because it's about our human interactions, you know, and it doesn't matter. I know when I was dealing with, let's say, so it was my nan who used to live with us, and she had dementia before she died. And I know on those moments when I would sit with her in a way that was reassuring her, and, you know, from whatever was scaring her in that moment, or whatever feeling she was having of confusion, that my confidence and my calm, for want of a better phrase, was the thing that made the difference in that moment. There was plenty of other times where I wasn't so calm and I wasn't so, you know, empathetic about it, and I get that, but they weren't. I was more effective when I was calm. I was more effective when I was confident. I was more effective when I tried to understand what she was feeling in that moment, because it didn't matter. You know, as an example, right? So I would care for her at nighttime sometimes, and she would wake up very startled, and I would walk into her room, and she would think that I was her husband Hugh, and yet she'd be confused by that because he passed away. So this would scare her, and yet she'd want some reassurance. So me trying to find a calm way to reassure her and to allay her fears was the thing that helped calm her and then get her back to sleep. It wasn't rocket science, and neither is mental health first aid. It wasn't about reinventing the wheel. It was just giving me the confidence to be able to sit with her at a human level at what she was experiencing, because whether it was real or not, she was afraid. Whether it was real or not, she was worried. They were real feelings she was having. And that's why I think what mental health first aid teaches people is how to respond to how someone's feeling in that moment.
Okay. And just reflect, you said there that when you were calm and sometimes you weren't so calm, that you noticed a difference. What helped you feel calmer? Did you ever notice, what was it to do with the environment or yourself or the situation?
I think for me, and like it wasn't, honestly, I got it wrong just as much as I got it right, because this is before I had the level of training and experience I have now. But you know, on reflection, looking back at it now, when I got it right, sometimes it was actually knowing that if I can remain calm in this moment, that it will have a better outcome, that it won't take so long, that she'll feel better ultimately. Because at the end of the day, when we see people who are struggling, we want to make it better. We want to take the pain away. I know as a parent, when it comes to my children, if they scuff their knee or if they're upset by a friend or something, or an emotional or a physical reason, I want to take the pain away. When actually maybe what they needed was me just to be there with them in the present in that moment. So I think when I realized that the calm was what was going to work, I used to try and take moments where I'd go just take that breath just before I reacted, and instead maybe try to respond rather than react. You know, I know that somebody told me that years ago. You try and respond. It requires consideration. It requires you to take a moment to see to weigh up your experience of what works and what doesn't. And I learned, you know, through trial and error, that it was better to be calm in the moment and take a breath, just a moment, and then try and, you know, respond to her needs and meet her where she was at, you know.
Okay, great.
I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. And as you're talking, it's reminding me of the kind of comments that Helen Rochford Brennan and others in the Irish Dementia Working Group would say, you know, seeing the person, not the dementia. So the person has dementia, but that person is a person first and foremost. So if you come to them from that place, well, then that's a really good place to start. Somebody here has asked about the course. How much does the course cost?
So we have different ways of funding mental health first aid. Firstly, we have a particular kind of project that we work with the HSE, where the HSE funds training for various target groups and members of the public. We're in the middle of just planning this year's work, just because we got delayed, obviously, because of COVID. So that's where we have fully funded courses for members of the public who fall within certain areas of target groups, or to certain communities in Ireland where they happen to have, we've happened to target mental health first aid to certain more rural group or rural communities as well at times. So we're just doing our best every year to expand that group and to go to different areas. So there's sometimes ways of accessing it through the HSE funding. Directly funding it yourself, or mostly the corporate world is who fund the mental health first aid training for their employees. But if you were to directly fund it yourself, it would actually be valued at €300 per person for the two full days of training. So it's a very comprehensive piece of training, fully manualized with, you know, expert instructors and you know, evidence-based material. So that's why it's so valuable. However, we do our best to be able to try and find ways to fund the training for members of the public who can't ordinarily afford it. So we offer it to our homeless services, to our to various charity and voluntary sector groups, such as we've delivered it through AWARE, the National Youth Council, and the HSE, all kinds of groups like that. So that's the value, but we do our best to make it as free and as available to most people as possible.
Okay, thank you. We have another comment here from someone who's asking, do you have any kind of tips on how to interact with someone who has depression or you feel has depression?
It wouldn't, again, we do break it down in our training for both depression, anxiety, psychosis, substance abuse, all the various topics. And yet what I'm at pains to tell people is it's not necessarily about the diagnosis. And again, I'm back to this, meeting the person at a human level, meeting the person with where they're at. So the first place to start with someone with depression is to try and understand what that experience is like for them. You know, if that means you're actually asking them, what's it like for you? You know, and can you tell me more about it? But it's questions that are open, that allow the person to feel heard. It's less about what you have to say and more about giving them an opportunity to talk and for them to feel heard. And yes, we want to fix and we want to take away the pain, but very often when we're trying to fix something, it means we're not listening to the person. We're thinking of what the solution is. You know, very rarely has, you know, trying to fix something actually ever shown somebody that we heard them. So for communication with somebody with depression, focus on the listening. Somebody said to me years ago, and I don't know where I stole this idea from, so I apologize, but we have 2 of these and 1 of these, and we should use this twice as much as we use this. We should listen more than we speak. We should show the person that we're listening as well. communicate in non-verbal ways, in small verbal ways, because it's a conversation after all. I'm not saying sit there in silence, but ask the person how they're feeling. Ask them to tell you about it, and try and relate, because you know what, we can all relate to some of these feelings. We might not be able to relate to depression as the cause, but we can relate to what it feels like to feel sad, to feel afraid, to be frustrated, confused, to really meet the person in where they're at in those feelings. And I think that's the first place we can try and do it. Look, do you know what? I get it wrong more often than I get it right when I'm dealing with it in my own life, I'll be honest. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't keep trying. Keep trying to listen and to spend time with that person, let them know that they're heard, and let them know, most importantly, that people with mental health problems can and do get better. Recovery is very much possible when it comes to mental health problems. It doesn't have to define a whole person's life, and it certainly doesn't have to be, a life sentence as such. You may have to live with depression for the rest of their life, but it doesn't mean they have to be defined with it, or it doesn't mean it has to get in the way of them reaching their potential, whatever that potential is.
Okay, thank you. And somebody here asking about kind of signposting that. Would you, on your website, do you have any signposting to resources and organizations that people can go to for help?
Yes, we do, certainly. So our website, which is www.mhfaireland.ie, has a resources page, which not only has our own internal resources that we have made publicly available to people, so tips and resources around COVID, tips and resources about how to have a better conversation around mental health, but also it has signposting there to a lot of other mental health organizations in the country. Everyone from Aware to Spun Out to, and that list is ever evolving. So we're always looking for new organizations to be able to add to that as well, and to be able to signpost to the great help that is out there. Because very often it's that people think that help isn't available, and instead it's about helping a person navigate the system a little bit, to help them to know that there is really good, effective help available, but how do I access it? Or what do I say in that? How do I communicate what's important? So yeah, we've got some really great resources there for that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Donal, for joining us here today and for that presentation.
No problem at all. I'm glad to join you.